members of the Council, honoured guests, please be upstanding for the worshipful, the Mayor of Kirklees, Councillor Cahal Burke.
Welcome everybody to this evening's meeting. Announcements. Welcome to Councillor Ibrahim Duckart, elected on the 31st of August 2023 at the Batley East by-election. Congratulations and welcome. I would like to congratulate Dewsbury Rams on being promoted back to the Championship League. On the Rugby League theme, I would also like to congratulate Batley Bulldogs on reaching the final of the 1895 Cup at Wembley. The 1895 Cup is named in honour of the founding of the Northern Union in 1895. So they were at Wembley, but unfortunately they weren't successful on this occasion, but put in a fantastic performance. So congratulations to both Dewsbury Rams and Batley Bulldogs. I'm delighted to announce that the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Nosheen Dad, has given birth to a baby girl. I went to see them at the weekend and they're all doing good, so we pass on our best wishes to them. We will be having a break this evening at around 7 p.m. or when appropriate. Before moving on to the Chief Executive's announcements, I would like to take this opportunity, as it is the Chief Executive's last meeting at the Council, to thank her for her commitment, her service to the local authority over the years and all that she has contributed. And I'm sure leading members would like to take this opportunity also to say a few words. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So today, we gather today for our council meeting and also to bid farewell to a remarkable leader who has dedicated an astounding 23 years of her life to Kirklees Council. Yes, you guessed it right. We're talking about none other than the retiring Chief Exec, Jackie Gedman. Jackie, your journey with us has been nothing short of extraordinary. You've raised the bar, not just in terms of professional accomplishments, but you've also in your unwavering commitment to the betterment of our community. You've been a force behind lowering the barriers for our young employees network, also fostering strong ties within our communities. Your vision and drive have paved the way for countless opportunities for growth in Kirklees. But it's not just the professional achievements that we celebrate today, Jackie. Your kind, supportive nature has often been the key that unlocked doors and hearts alike. You've been a mentor to all of us. You've been a guide and a friend to many. You're always ready to lend a helping hand in your encouraging words. You're like a whirlwind when you come in, but we all feel reassured. As you step into a new chapter in your life and you leave behind a legacy that's nothing short of monumental. Your mark in Kirklees will be felt for years to come, and the positive changes you've ushered will continue to shape our communities. So on behalf of Kirklees Labour Group, we want to extend a heartfelt gratitude for your tireless dedication, your unwavering commitment. We wish you all the best and a well-deserved retirement, and wherever your endeavours lead you to, we know you will be an invaluable asset. So here's to you, Jackie, our Chief Executive, our leader, our friend, and a true champion of Kirklees. May your retirement be filled with joy, new adventures, and the same passion that's defined this incredible career continue. So we'd like to present you with something. And we did colour coordinate for you, Jackie. Thank you so much. You've been brilliant. Absolutely. Thank you so much. They're beautiful.
You know me well, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor Hall.
Mr Mayor, I'd like to associate myself with those comments made by Councillor Scott. It's indeed an achievement to have, I'm going to call you Jackie, you don't mind, do you, Jackie, in public? For Jackie to have worked her way up through the ranks of Kirklees. I remember her being appointed head of highways, then a director, which she only got, by the way, because she was the only candidate who wasn't wearing stripy socks. But I'll tell you about that tale later. And of course the Chief Executive. She's been a great ambassador for Kirklees within and without the borough, and respected across all partnerships, local partnerships and wider afield. I have to say, one of the joys of council meetings to me is watching Jackie's face while the debates are taking place. Sometimes that steely exterior does let slip from time to time. It can be a chuckle of joy or a raised eyebrow or a very stern grimace. But we always know what you're thinking, Jackie, don't worry. And I've always valued our confidential chats. It's a rare position really for the Chief Exec to be both confident and advisor to all the group leaders. And Jackie, you've always known when to keep a secret and when to share a secret. And that takes a lot of political nous. So thank you very much. I do wish you all the best for your retirement, and on behalf of the Conservative group, why on earth we let officers retire so young, I do not know. But thank you for all your efforts.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo the comments of the previous speakers and frame my comments in a vote of recognition and thanks rather than eulogy. And not just for your time as CEO, but for the long, unstinting service to people of Kirklees for the past 23 years. Your early career with us in highways set you up well for the challenges to come, not least of them being how to operate in a male-dominated environment of highways, something that, as we've all observed, resulted in you being a great champion for diversity in local government wherever and whenever you could throughout your career. Those challenges, though, couldn't have prepared anyone for the upheavals of COVID, and it's possibly through that lens of that one global event that the nature of Jackie's contributions to Kirklees and her values can be illustrated. From that last sombre in-person meeting we had just an hour before lockdown was announced, Jackie brought her typical compassion, energy and organisation to every meeting we had during that period, bar none. Even when there was no news to speak of, there was always discussion about what we could do and how to go about it. This was not a nationwide approach. And it was a lot to do, though, with Jackie's valuing different voices in the room and making sure that information got to the people who needed it. Those conversations weren't one way either. There was always a listening ear, even when time started to get a bit woolly and some of the members' kind of questions got a little bit repetitive, mea culpa. The quality of empathy through listening, though, is something that Jackie uses particularly well and is always appreciated by her team and members. During that time, she also displayed that familiar loyalty to Kirklees and fought our corner in discussions outside council. She made sure that staff at the pointy end didn't get burnt out and that those who were adrift got opportunity to volunteer or redeploy to something, and that gave many a boost in their difficult circumstances. Coming out of COVID meant Jackie, with her other hat on as returning officer, had to pick her way through this strange new world of social distancing, limits of number of people in rooms, and all the rest, to produce a meaningful set of election results in Kirklees that everyone could feel was fair, and that had a lot to do with the journey back to normal. Her approach has never been can't, but how, something that many of our officers share in common and that she always nurtured. Like I said, that's just like a little thumbnail picture of a snapshot, hoping to illustrate what it was like to have worked with Jackie, someone I'm proud to have worked with and from whom I've learned a lot. Have I ever seen Jackie laughing or joking? Well, I think that's her default state. Have you ever seen her angry? Rarely, and it was always the quiet ones that you had to watch. I remember a certain phone being left on during a Teams meeting. That was a quiet one. Have I ever seen her down? Well, one of the things that we need to establish very early on with Steve Mawson is just where he stands on his version of the glass being half full. With that said, Liberal Democrat Group wish you and your family all the very best in your next adventure. Maybe have a weekend off before you start that. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Councillor Cooper.
Jackie, thank you for your service. Really, I think we all appreciate it. I was talking to your first boss last night of Kirklees, Peter Taylor, who's now the coordinator of Kirklees Green Party. He spoke warmly of you, and he said he doesn't remember anything about Highways Nights Out at all. You became chief executive after Adrian Lithgow. Now, Adrian Lithgow, as I remember, he was the sphinx in council meetings, wasn't he? You couldn't tell anything. That mayhem could be going on. Members could be doing all sorts of things or saying all sorts of things, but he remained enigmatic, sphinx-like. You couldn't tell an absolute thing. Now, Jackie, I think, was nearly mastering that right up until the last council meeting. But the great thing about Jackie is she is always optimistic and cheerful, and we've heard about that. We've heard about the glass half full aspect. I think sometimes Jackie's glass is nearly empty, but she thinks it's full, really, and so that's been actually really useful in quite difficult times. We had the pandemic, obviously, and we spent a lot of time, the members, leading members, that Outbreak Control Board, and spent some time with our MPs there as well. And those meetings were obviously during some of the council's most difficult times, but Jackie, I think, played a crucial role in leading us through that. And I think none of us will forget Barry Shearman saying, "It's a wrap" at the end of each of the outbreak control meetings. So, Barry Shearman, MP for Huddersfield. Yeah, anyway, So thank you. I'll miss our chats, Jackie. Like has been said, always interesting. We could always, I'd talk about my opinions and my views, and you tolerate them, which was good, which not everybody does. So that's great. So thank you, Jackie. Good luck with your future endeavours and enjoy.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. In fact, Jackie this evening has a glass and a half in front of her. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much. So now is your right of reply, as it were.
I'm actually lost for words. I didn't know that was happening, so I just want to say a huge thank you. And what an absolute privilege it has been to work for this council for 23 years. Lots of people think working for a council is an easy life, and I know that people in this room know it's far from that. And many people dedicate their careers to working for councils, and very few people manage to work for councils like this. So I just want to say a huge thank you. I do want to recognise the role of councillors as well. Many of you will know that I fundamentally start from a position of respecting that role, and that is because you are accessible 24/7. You do a job that is so difficult in trying times that actually to be an officer is so much easier, and remembering that on a daily basis is part of the job. I've learned so much from you all, even from the ones that I wouldn't have wanted to learn things from. And you'll know who you are, because my face apparently tells it all. But I wouldn't have traded a single of one of you in terms of the experiences that I've had over the past 23 years. For the newer ones who I've not got to know as well, I've really missed out on that, but I do wish you the best of luck. For the ones that are here that have been with me for a very long time, every single one of you has shaped me and my family in some way or another, and I just want to say thank you for that. And then finally, for the ones that are really clear that they feel that they don't know me very well enough, I think that you will have shaped me in a way that you won't know, because I'm always mindful of how difficult it is to be a backbencher at times and hear direct from members of the public things that are not happening that the council should be doing, and trying to change that can feel like changing the Titanic at sometimes, and I really recognise that. So I know that we'll continue to do our best in that way. So just finally, I just want to say one more thing, that I know the next few years actually are going to be quite difficult, but I really genuinely believe the council is safe in your hands. There is a plan, there are difficult things to do ahead, but I just know that you'll focus on doing the right thing for residents and for the staff, and in doing that, you will all achieve the success that I know that this borough can achieve. So thank you.
Thank you all very much. Item 2, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have apologies from Councillor Adam Gregg, and a couple of members will be arriving later on, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sokol.
Mr. Mayor, apology from Councillor Afaq Butt and Councillor Adam Jaman, and you already recorded apology from Deputy Mayor Nosheen Dad. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sokol. Councillor Munro.
Mr Mayor, I'd just like to give apologies for Councillor Kath Pinnock and Councillor Paola Davies. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other apologies? No. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. I move that the minutes of the meetings council held on the 12th of July 2023 and 18th of August 23 be approved as a correct record. Is that seconded? Councillor Sokol.
Mr. Mayor, I second the minutes of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sokol. Can we please vote by show of hands? Thank you, that is carried. Item 4, declarations of interest. Members who have any disclosable pecuniary interests which would prevent them from discussing or voting on any item should disclose these interests now. Are there any interests to declare? No. Item 5, petitions from members of the council. Are there any petitions from members of the council? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to hand in a petition on behalf of the Save Dryclough Road Horses Fields and ask that Kirklees Council reconsider the planned development on the Horses Fields. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. In accordance with Council Procedure Rule 9.3, I direct that the subject matter of the petition be referred to the appropriate Service Director for investigation. Are there any further petitions? No. Item 6, deputations and petitions from members of the public. We have 2 deputations this evening. Deputation 1, can I please invite Mick Donoghue on behalf of Unison to present his deputation? Welcome to the meeting. You have 5 minutes to present your deputation to Council.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. 13 years of Tory mismanagement have brought the country to its knees. Our infrastructure is literally crumbling. More than 4 million children are now in poverty, and we are in the midst of a mental health epidemic. During that time, the richest in the country have seen their wealth increase significantly, with a 20% increase in the number of billionaires in the 3 years alone. Kirklees Council, like any other local authority, has been left to try to plug the gaps that the government has created. Council services provide a vital lifeline for the most vulnerable in our society. 13 successive years of inadequate and unfair funding settlements have brought Kirklees Council to the brink of collapse. While affluent areas have prospered, Kirklees is presiding over service closures and mass redundancies as it tries to bridge a 47 million forecast budget gap for 2024. The Council say the cuts are necessary. If it is to avoid following Northampton, Croydon, Thurrock, Woking, Slough and Birmingham into bankruptcy, we believe the cuts will just kick the can down the road. Without a fair funding settlement, it is only a matter of time before Kirklees cannot afford to run even its statutory duties, including adult social care, where we are currently seeing more than £400,000 of service cuts, even before the proposed cuts are implemented. The Council's response to the funding crisis has been to issue a HR1 notice, which will see 250 redundancies. This is only the first phase of up to 750 redundancies across the Council. This is in addition to proposed service cuts that we know about in partner organisations, such as Kirklees Active Leisure, as well as those that we anticipate will result from the Council's precarious financial position. No details have yet been provided to the trade unions as to which services or posts will be directly affected, but the loss of 750 jobs will inevitably hurt those most who rely on Council services the most. The announcement of redundancies with no further information has done nothing but unsettle and demoralise the Council workforce. As a significant stakeholder representing some 9,000 members across Kirklees, Unison is calling upon the Government to provide adequate funding to Kirklees Council, including emergency funding to protect vital services. We have written to local MPs to ask them to raise this issue in Parliament and to support the early day motion calling for parliamentary debate on council funding. We have also encouraged our members to contact their MPs. We call on the Council to join Kirklees Unison in our campaign for adequate funding from central government. We also call on Kirklees Council to rethink its plans, which will decimate services, cast hundreds of workers into unemployment, and have a detrimental impact on the local economy, not to mention the health and well-being of Kirklees residents, particularly the most vulnerable in our society. Questions are understandably being asked about the wisdom of continuing with capital works projects when services are facing cuts or closure. Improvements to public realm will be of little benefit to those who rely on essential services if those services are cut. The Council should immediately cease the use of consultants and should not pay a penny more to the firm that is advising it on how to make cuts in adult social care. Until such time as adequate funding is made available by central government, the council's spending plan should be determined by what is needed to provide vital public services, rather than what is needed to balance its books. If the cuts go ahead, they will do irreversible damage to the Kirklees community. Kirklees Council should not be doing the Tory government's dirty work for them by passing on the Tory funding cuts that will hurt its residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Donoghue, and thank you for attending. Call on Councillor Davis to respond, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And thank you, Mick and Unison, for bringing this deputation to the Council. And this Labour administration certainly agree with you that the last 13 years of Tory mismanagement have brought the country to its knees. That under Tories, as you said, our infrastructure is literally crumbling, and the number of children in poverty has grown. But of course, during that period, we've seen the super rich in the UK become even more powerful and more wealthy. In the meantime, councils like Kirklees have been starved of government funds. The Prime Minister himself boasted about diverting resources from councils like ourselves to more prosperous areas. And now we're facing the inevitable consequences of national economic mismanagement, a decade of austerity, and a cost of living crisis. Now, I didn't get into politics to be cutting services, and nobody in our Labour group did either. We want to invest in our services and do more, not less. But we are left with the painful reality of local government at the moment, which is we are indeed the local administrators of conservative negligence and economic failure. When I think about the decisions that we have to make to deliver the savings that we need, it's upsetting, it's painful. But we cannot let the difficulty of these decisions get in the way of being a responsible administration. We are determined to stabilise the Council's finances and not hand over the keys to the Council to the Conservative government, who would most definitely not have the best interests of residents and staff at heart. And as we know, this will probably, if this did happen, it would probably result in much deeper and more painful cuts with resultant increased job losses. And in recent times, we've had discussions with some of our local Tory councillors who actually believe that we should be cutting deeper and quicker when it comes to savings. So I understand the frustration of Unison and its members, and I also understand how anxious our staff will be at this time. They don't deserve this. That's why we'll continue regular dialogue with union colleagues, and we will engage with all affected colleagues in the proper way. We'll also look to redeploy as many of our brilliant staff as we possibly can and support them through this difficult time. So once again, I would like to thank you for bringing this deputation to Council and highlighting the immense damage that the Tories are inflicting on this Council and the people that it serves. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. For a second deputation, can I please invite Amelia Franks to present her deputation? Welcome to the meeting. You have 5 minutes to present your deputation, please.
Okay, thank you. My name's Amelia and I am the owner of Countryside Canines Dog Walking and Home Boarding. I'm joined by Julia, who runs Happy Hounds, and Susie, who runs Stroll and Stay with Susie. And we're all affected about what we're here to talk about. We are here to call for the new animal licensing fees, which are effective from October this year, to be reviewed. We don't feel the rates of a home boarding licence for dogs are fair or reasonable to small-scale home boarders such as ourselves. The impact of these fees is going to be detrimental to our businesses, and we will be forced to close. The fees have increased by a significant 482%, from £482 for a 3-year licence to £1,872. Should we use the same price increase, on average we would be charging approximately £145 per night for one boarding dog. If anyone is a dog owner in here, that is just totally unreasonable. Whilst we understand the need for a price increase, the planned increase is so drastic that it's going to become an overhead which is just not feasible for many small businesses. We ourselves also face increased costs of running our business in order to meet the welfare standards of all dogs in our care. So for example, we pay a lot of high electricity and heating bills to make sure the dogs have got adequate lighting and heating, and we face that cost. The increase in licence fees is a cost that we simply cannot meet. It's frustrating that our neighbouring councils have significantly cheaper licences. So a licence in Leeds costing £403, Calderdale is £409 and Wakefield £341. But we are being asked to pay £1,872. How is that fair? Other councils also offer a sliding scale model where the cost of a licence varies depending on the amount of dogs you hold a licence for. We don't understand why this model can't be used in our council in order to save the smaller businesses. To put into perspective, I board one dog at a time, so I offer a very unique service, but my licence is the same cost as a kennel who might have 20 plus dogs at any one time who operate £365 a year. So we're calling for the sliding scale model to be implemented to support businesses such as ours. Ultimately, small businesses cannot afford to renew our licences and we will feel forced into stopping our businesses of home boarding. I've spoken to a number of local establishments who have a current licence, and so far 10 of them have said they will have to stop boarding and will not be seeking a new licence. That's 10, and I made contact with approximately 12 out of the list. I didn't have time to make contact with the rest. We put so much effort into our licences. Many of us have 4- and 5-star licences that we're very proud of, that people can come and leave their dog in such a good place. That's due to the effort and care that we put in, but ultimately our livelihood is going to be ruined because we cannot afford these fees. And it's as simple as that. We also know of many other dog walkers who were previously looking for a licence, but now they're not seeking one because they cannot afford the increased price. Not only is it concerning that our businesses are at risk, but as a predominantly female industry, we feel that the female business owners are facing yet another unintentional disadvantage in society. I have asked if other industries, which are predominantly male-led, have faced similar price increases within Kirklees. However, I'm yet to receive a response on this. Lastly, and most importantly, we feel as though the welfare of the dogs and dog owners within Kirklees has been totally overlooked. We mostly take on dogs that are not suitable for kennels. They might be anxious, nervous, come from a rescue centre and have very specific requirements. There's already a shortage of good quality home boarders. We often have to turn away clients because we're too fully booked. We don't have room for any more. And when we cease trading, where are these dogs going to go? Because I don't know. As an example, I recently looked after a Romanian rescue Bella. She's nervous, she's anxious. As an ex-street dog, kennels were just not an option for Bella. She required a calming and reassuring environment. She had special dietary requirements. She wasn't good around strangers, and she couldn't even walk on hard floors without showing signs of distress and anxiety. Dogs like Bella have been forgotten in this decision. There's also a worry that there will be a rise in unlicensed boarding, where standards aren't regulated or dog owners simply do not have leisurely breaks as they have nowhere to place their dogs. This is evident from the petition we created, which has been signed by over 2,000 residents of Kirklees that are in despair and are worried about where their dogs will go, and they wholly do not agree with the proposed price increase. 2,000 people can't be wrong. Ourselves and our clients are in despair. We urgently call for the new licensing fees to be reviewed before many of us lose our essential businesses that we've worked hard for and before dog owners find themselves making tough decisions about where to place their dogs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I ask Councillor Ahmed to respond, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your deputation, Amelia Franks. The Council appreciates the impact of the proposed fee increases on animal licence holders, particularly small home boarding businesses such as yours, which may have fewer dogs than other large boarding establishments. The decision to increase the licence fees so significantly has not been done with great reluctance. In response to the particular point you raised regarding the apparent disproportionate fees affecting small businesses, in that the licence fees are the same for home boarder with fewer dogs as a boarding kennel business, 25 plus dogs. Unfortunately, the size of the business has minimal impact on the actual cost of carrying out the licensing process, but understand the fee will impact some businesses more than others. The difference in size and scale between home boarders or large kennel businesses is, however, recognised in the lower licence consideration fee for a home boarder. To confirm, any dog walking business that doesn't keep the dog at their home or any other address falls out of the scope of regulations and would not require a licence to operate. The Council takes the welfare of dogs and any other animals very seriously. Whilst the new 3-year licence fee of $1,871 is an increase, it equates to approximately £12 per week and £1.70 per day as a business cost. We have also made it possible to pay a proportion of the licence fee by direct debit to help spread the cost across the period of licence, rather than requiring it to be paid up front as was previously required. I am also more than happy to have a conversation with you all out of this chamber. So thank you for coming this evening with your deputation, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ahmed. Thank you, Amelia, for the deputation, and I hope you'll take up the offer of meeting with Councillor Ahmed to discuss further. Are there any public petitions? No. Item 7, public question time. There's one public question this evening. Can I please invite Andy Wilson to ask his question?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I'm Andy Wilson, Home Valley Parish Councillor and long-time resident of Homebridge. I'd like to ask a question tonight concerning the green lanes, in our area in particular, but across Kirklees. For several years now, the residents and public have suffered from antisocial behaviour on our green lanes, from 4x4 vehicles, quad bikes and motorcycles. In particular, Ramsden Road and the Cheesegate, Nab, Scaly Gate areas have seen environmental damage, intimidation of residents, property damage, fly tipping, dumping and burning of vehicles, resulting in effective exclusion to the general public. This partly takes place in the Peak District National Park, an area of beauty and tranquility. We have had a series of ineffective solutions from Kirklees. The latest promise of TPOs in place within 3 to 4 months expired at the end of July, and we're currently unable to get anyone to give an update. Would the Cabinet member please explain just what the Council can and will do to tackle the problems?
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Can I ask Councillor Ahmed to respond, please?
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, for your question. I have every sympathy with the residents who are affected by the antisocial behaviour and will continue to ask you that it's reported whenever it occurs. I will ask officers to provide an update on intended actions and timelines directly to you if you've not already had any, Mr. Wilson.
Correspondence, but nothing directly.
Yeah, that, Mr. Wilson. Okay. Thank you.
Could I ask a supplementary question?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Supplementary, Mr. Wilson.
I think many of these problems are made much worse by poor communications with officers. Unanswered emails, phone calls that aren't answered, and callbacks unreturned. These are the norm. How do you propose improving this situation?
Thank you for your question. I'm happy to go back, like I said, and speak to the relevant officers that have been dealing with your case and get back to you with a response to that and make sure you do get emails answered and phone calls. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, for attending. Thank you for your question. Thank you, Councillor Ahmed. Item 8, West Yorkshire Combined Authority minutes, page 13, minutes of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. This is to receive for information the minutes of West Yorkshire Combined Authority. The minutes are here for noting. Are there any comments or questions regarding the minutes? We don't need to do anything, do we? No. Okay, thank you. Item 8 is done. Item 9, election of the Leader of the Council. Council shall consider appointment of the Leader of the Council in accordance with Article 7 of the Constitution. Can I invite nominations for the election of the Leader of the Council? Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to nominate Councillor Cathy Scott for the position of Leader of the Council.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Is that seconded? Councillor Simpson.
Mr. Mayor, I'm delighted to second that nomination and I'll reserve the right with equal enthusiasm.
Marvellous. Thank you. Are there any further nominations? No. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to nominate Councillor David Hall. I think he's got the experience to lead this council through what will be a difficult period. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Is that seconded?
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Smage.
Can I just clarify that because we've got 2 nominations, that a vote will be taken on the individual nominations in the order that they're proposed. The first nominee to receive a majority of votes will be appointed as leader. Is that clear? So that means I think we'll take a vote on the first nomination.
Thank you. Okay, we'll start with Councillor Scott. For all those in favour. Against? And abstentions? Okay, that is carried. Congratulations, Councillor Scott. Would you like to address Council, Councillor Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I've got to say I'm deeply humbled in the trust you've given me, and I know we've got challenges, not only in our financial budget, but with each other within the chamber. I know where we're going, we've got a plan, and that's where we're going to take it. In our administration, we care about people, so I'd like to thank everybody that offered their support for me today, and my door's always open. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Item 10, page 69. Planning Scheme of Delegation and Planning Committee, reference from Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. Councillor Homewood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think members are fully aware of this item and the recommendations, so I will just move that the recommendations at paragraph 7, pages 74 and 75 be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Homewood. Is that seconded?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to second and reserve the right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Are there any comments on this matter? Councillor Cooper.
We'll be voting against because we weren't consulted and it says so in the report. So no, against.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Pinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am totally opposed to this. When I first heard about it, I thought that it's undemocratic for a start. On all sorts of levels. At the moment, we have 3 committees. One, the Strategic Planning Committee has 7 members. The other 2 have 15 each. Now, these are councillors who do spend quite a lot of time considering planning applications. I have always thought, and I am not the only person who thinks this, that 7 members on the Strategic Committee is simply not enough. It sometimes puts too much pressure on those members that are there. And really, in this alteration, consideration should be given to increasing the number on the Strategic Committee. And as for the other one, the other committee, which has got a really rather cumbersome name, something needs to be done about that because it doesn't, there's too many words in the description. There is only one committee, and unless I'm very much mistaken, that committee will be meeting in Huddersfield, thereby excluding a large proportion of the borough's population. At the moment, one of the subcommittees meets in Dewsbury, and that is far more easy to get to for a lot of people in North Kirklees than it is to get into Huddersfield. For instance, if I were to use a bus from where I live, it takes over an hour to get to Huddersfield and goes a really very peculiar route via Dalton. And, all right, so therefore you get in your car, don't you? And I thought this council was very keen on trying to discourage people from using their cars. That's my main objection to this, that it is concentrating things into Huddersfield again, which has not got the best transport links with some parts of the borough, and it it could, on occasions, exclude people from making their representations at committee. So, yeah, I don't like it. I think consideration should be given to retaining the 3 committees that we've got, and also changing the number of members, because they are not commensurate with making good decisions, in my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pinnock. Councillor Turner.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. And they can't stop me. Jackie, thank you very much for your service over the last 23 years. They can't stop me while I'm stood here. We've heard many times from many of you here this evening, and developers and residents, that the planning system in Kirklees is too slow, stifling development, and impacting the local economy, affecting builders and householders alike. The planning system was last reviewed some years ago. Such clear a review is long overdue. We had a peer review in January 2020, which has several recommendations in it. Recommendation number 7 was clearly stated: running 3 committees is a big collective commitment for Kirklees, and their value should be critically assessed. It could include a benchmark of the scheme of delegation and the sort of applications, decisions made at committee, with a view to ensuring that committees deal with the most important applications and are able to give them the appropriate scrutiny. This review should also cover the impact on planners who may be required to attend several committees in a fortnight. It was also noted that on an observation of the peer group, stated the strategic committee we saw could use its time more effectively, especially around the number of speakers allowed, that repeated similar points. Kirklees runs a large number of committees, and in general rates of delegation are low. Running 3 committees is hard work for members, as well as the officers supporting them, with some officers attending all 3 in the committee cycle, and it makes sense to review the approach to planning committees to ensure it remains the correct choice of Kirklees. The proposal contained within this report seek to help address those issues. Not only will these changes improve the speed of decisions, there will be some savings to be had, not a great deal I accept, but we do need to find savings wherever we can. This civic year so far, all 3 committees, as the average has been 2.3 applications per committee and an average of 2 apologies per committee. The 2-committee system clearly has a capacity to deal with the number of applications that go to committee, which anyway will be reduced by a new scheme of delegation. It's very clear that by reducing the number of committees, we will take pressure off our officers and allow them more time to devote to getting applications processed in a timely manner. It will also take pressure off elected members, who must devote the best part of a day to committee meeting if you include site visits. Councillor Pinnock mentions about transport. Some of you know, I used to live in Denbydale. I have no idea how you get a bus to Dewsbury from Denbydale. I suspect you go to Huddersfield and then back out, or to Wakefield and back out. So I think that's a bit of a red herring, if I'm honest. We all occasionally have to travel distances. Sometimes you can't help where a facility is. So I don't accept that. That's a red herring, I'm afraid. The proposals have been presented to the 3 main political groups, and has also been to scrutiny, as we've heard. Following feedback, we've modified some of our original proposals, and I believe that this report has the full support of Council. I therefore ask Council to accept this report and the timelines contained within it, along with the recommendations of the scheme of delegation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would echo the comments of my colleague, Councillor Pinnock. I'm not sure that this fully addresses the problem it seeks to fix, and it's not the only solution. To quote a recent select committee on a completely different issue, I believe this is a poisoned cure. It will create barriers to engagement which will increase the democratic deficit and engagement of residents in the planning process. It's going to disenfranchise more residents, and as I said before, it does little or nothing to address the issues that it seeks to address, in my humble opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Mayor. So, this item has been brewing for a few months now. It's referred to as through corporate governance and audit. As such, we thank officers for the work on the proposals. There's a lot of work gone into it. That's accepted. I'll talk about the things I'm not happy with at the end, but the gist of the report, I think, starts from the right premise. It's well-intentioned. How do we do things smarter with less capacity and when it's so tight? And when costs are increasing, not only for councils, but applicants from anything with DIY projects to estates with hundreds of houses or whole business parks. On the other side of that equation is maintaining public confidence through accountability, participation, and representation. I'm fairly satisfied that the changes won't badly affect transparency or accountability from what it is now, or won't worsen things. I think officers' approach to residents and inquiries and the timeliness of reports often go beyond what is on offer elsewhere. And our case officers can be proud of the work they do, I feel. I'm also glad that on page 72 of the report pack, item 3.1, it's confirmed that there are no changes brought forward to the roles of the community in the planning process. There were some suggestions that that might happen in the pre-discussions. I'm glad that those have been dropped and that members were listened to during the process. For me, the difficulty lies in the new arrangements of the subcommittee, as my colleagues have already said, for minor applications especially. In terms of size and the lack of mechanism to ensure representation from different parts of the borough, that's my big bugbear. It's always been the Lib Dems group contention that the strategic panel has been too small. If both panels had been larger, then there would possibly have been an argument that representation on panels had been enhanced if the panel selection could be nailed to make sure that you could drill into the detail so that people were going from those areas that they were representing. I've always looked twice at subcommittee panel members sitting in full time on out of area, but this really does open up the possibility that an applicant or objector in Home Valley or Dewsbury or Spen not having the representation and local understanding on committee that they feel that they're entitled to. So I will recognise some of the least offensive or possibly even good parts of this proposal. We won't be voting for it for the reasons we've already given in group. But I would hope that if we're serious about trying to improve this, that this will be an ongoing process and that we'd have further discussion on panel sizes and the way that we make them up in future. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Are there any further questions? Right of reply, Councillor Homewood.
We did have some discussion about this at the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. The one point I just wanted to come back on was the point about the democratic element of it. And I just don't agree with the principle that was being put forward there, that somehow as if you have more members or more committees with more members on, that somehow you get better and more democratic decisions. And I was a little bit unsure about the point, I think it was Councillor Pinnock was making, that somehow if you have more members, that sort of dilutes the responsibility of the members on the panel or something. They won't feel as under pressure to make a decision. And I think the members that are on these committees are there to make decisions and to make correct decisions and to be really considerate of the decisions that they make, not to be concerned that they're having to make a decision. I think if that's your view as a member of that committee, then perhaps you shouldn't be a member of that committee. So, I think that was the only point I wanted to make, that I don't think this dilutes any sort of democratic purpose or decision-making purpose, but that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Homewood. We will go to the vote. Show of hands. All those in favour? Against? Any abstentions? It's carried. Thank you. Item 11, Members' Allowances Scheme, reference from Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. Councillor Homewood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, so we only had the Corporate Governance Audit Committee yesterday, so you do have a slightly amended list of recommendations here. Just to explain that the only difference to recommendations in the pack is just literally a wording clarification, to be honest. So it is pretty much as you've seen it in the council meeting agenda. The only thing that I just wanted to say was, and to reflect on what we discussed yesterday, was my kind of thoughts on this is that it's a relatively simple proposition that we're asking the council to consider, which is, I think quite rightly, the leadership of the council have said that as members we are looking at how we can make savings across the council, and one of those areas that we need to look at is our members' allowances, that they shouldn't be outside of that consideration. And so I think it's a pretty simple proposition in that to look at those and to agree a reduction in those allowances. The slight challenge is that it's not quite straightforward that from a procedural point of view, and so the recommendation set out how we can achieve that. And all I wanted to say from a governance perspective, having discussed it, is that I think we don't need to get bogged down in the process here. I think we just need to understand the recommendation, and that we have an opportunity as a council to come to a consensus, sensible decision about how we can support our residents in making a slight reduction to our allowances that supports the cost saving that we're undertaking. And I don't think we need to get too worked up about the procedure and how we go about that. At the end of the day, we would all be taking a voluntary reduction. In any way that we do that, that is public information that anybody can find out anyway. And all we're trying to do is do this at the council meeting so that we have a clear message to the public and a clear decision from the council. So with that in mind, I will move that the recommendation of Corporate Governance and Audit Committee as tabled in this additional paper be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Homewood. Is that seconded? Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Okay, comments? Councillor Armour.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It seems to me that the new council leader is making a cynical attempt to plant a seed of doubt in the minds of our residents by proposing that all councillors should don sackcloth and daub themselves with ashes whilst foregoing part of their allowances. She is seeking to suggest that all councillors have played an equal part in the financial catastrophe which has engulfed the borough, that there is some sort of collective responsibility for the present woes. Of course, Mr. Mayor, you, I, and indeed the new leader know full well that this council has long since adopted a governance model of strong leader and cabinet, in which the real power is concentrated in the hands of a small group of councillors. And we know, Mr. Mayor, you and I anyway, that every cabinet member, over the last 10 years or so, every strong leader and every cabinet member has been drawn from the Labour Party. We know, and the people of the borough know, just where the blame lies for where we are now. And it is not with the bulk of elected members of whatever party. It lies with a small coterie of elite Labour members. We were made aware last year that council was overspending in almost all areas. At that time, council agreed a list of supposedly stringent budget cuts and alterations to address the overspend. In February this year, council approved a so-called balanced budget proposed by the then Labour administration, most of whom remained in place, In a few short months, that has unravelled in spectacular fashion. And here we are, again. One financial calamity may be thought unfortunate. Two, in such short succession, smacks of incompetence of the highest order. The simple fact is that this Labour administration has been remarkably consistent over a number of iterations. It has consistently brought forward grandiose schemes of great cost but of little discernible value to residents, which have certainly played a part in pushing council towards effective insolvency. It has depleted reserves beyond the limits of fiscal prudence. It has used its voting majorities, both formal and de facto, to push forward its schemes without reference to those of us, and I include myself, who have called for necessary restraint. In short, Mr Mayor, Labour in Kirklees has, at best carelessly, and at worst recklessly, crashed this council's finances. Now, the new Labour leader seeks to redistribute the blame. Our residents won't fall for this. They indeed know where the blame lies, and I am not going to be blackmailed. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Armour. We'll have no shouting out or calling out, please, during the meeting. Councillor Pinnock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was actually at the Governance and Audit Committee meeting yesterday, and what does seem like a relatively simple proposal took much longer than it should have done. And we had a diatribe from a member of the committee which accused the council of bullying. Sorry, Councillor Scott, it accused you of bullying. I don't remember that. But anyway, the word bullying was used. To some extent, no, not to some extent, I didn't approve of that word. And when I spoke, I sought to distance myself from that, because although I do have a question about the wording of the recommendation, I am not accusing anybody of bullying. However, I do think it would have been slightly better if the wording had been something like, this council believes that members should consider, rather than pointing directly at members individually, because it says ask all members in attendance to indicate by recorded vote. There is a kind of, it does seem to me there is a kind of more general way of putting it that doesn't point directly at councillors. They'll still be taking the same decision, but I am conscious of the fact that there will be some members, and I have no idea who they are, who may be put into difficulties by agreeing to this. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it, because I voted for the motion at yesterday's meeting. I just think that we should not expose members unnecessarily in a case like this. We will all have to make a decision about whether we accept this in any case. But that initially, at least, is done in private. It will be made known later. But I just think that too much can be made of this. It's a gesture, yes, but one that I think we have to make, because to the public out there, if we're not seen to be taking part in this, whatever one thinks about redundancies and all of that, there has to be a point at which members show that they are in some way involved in this. So I support the recommendation, yes. Sorry, there is one other point that I wish to make, and I made it yesterday. It's about the appointment of a new members' allowance group, and I did suggest that the terms of reference for that should include the ability for them to take cognizance of the current financial situation and not necessarily recommend an increase in members' allowances, but try to work out a way of, because that was one of the problems that led, one of the things that led to the decision that was taken earlier in the year. I just think that we need to look at the wording of that appointment so that we can get over that issue. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pinnock. Councillor Addy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I first saw this proposal, I had mixed feelings. I wondered if it would seem tokenistic in light of people losing their jobs to redundancies. Would it seem to suggest pressure to staff to accept facing more work to cover jobs not filled and redundant colleagues for the same pay? But if we were looking at any other big employer in the district, the first thing we would ask is, how are the decision makers contributing? Councillors' allowances are tiny, so we can't make the big impact a slice of a corporate director's wage would. But even the saving of a handful of jobs is important to show we're prepared to do our bit. And yes, councillor allowances are hugely important to democracy, to ensure people of working age of all backgrounds able to take part in the management and shaping of their communities through local government. I know people say once something's cut or gone, you don't get it back. But in better times, when the country's finances are better run, when the management of those finances really means levelling up and not running down the regions, when local government is properly funded and service levels are high, then we can demand that councillors' allowances are high enough to ensure we continue to have this great mix of ages and backgrounds as our decision makers. Now is not that time. Now it's time to make this sacrifice, and now it's time to show solidarity. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Addy. Councillor Ramsey. Did you... You indicated, and I took that as a...
All right, okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll be succinct because I don't think this is the most important issue of today. Obviously, I support the proposal and I support it for several reasons. Some have been made really clearly. I liked very much what Councillor Addy got to say, and I agree, Councillor Pinnock, that we do need to make some effort to show that that we've got some skin in here. We, councillors, Labour councillors, are showing through strong leadership that we are putting public service above our own interests. We must show our residents and our workforce that we are on their side. We understand how horrendous it is for some of our residents as they face difficulties in paying bills, feeding their children, etc., and that's due to the conservative cost of living crisis. And they know, we need to make sure that they know we care and that we're doing all we can. It's horrendous for staff too at this moment. Some will face losing their livelihood as we go through the process of cutting costs to enable us to achieve a balanced budget for next year. But if we can save any job, it will have a positive impact not only on that individual but on their family. My estimate is with the 100,000 initial target that we've got, we'll save 3 to 4 jobs. And please don't forget that that impacts on their families. We must remember that our staff deliver vital services and we need to protect those so that we can do the best for the public. So any job saved is in effect a help towards that public service.
Thank you, Councillor Ramsey. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're facing unprecedented financial pressures, which will be discussed later on this evening, and all of us are feeling the squeeze. Contrary to popular belief, local councils aren't making the big bucks. We're all here to represent our communities and the thousands of people who are also feeling the squeeze. We have a responsibility and a duty to represent them to the best of our abilities, day in, day out. Not to make money, but to be our residents' voice, make sure residents' voices are always heard. But it's not the councillors who deliver the services which people rely and depend on. I'm sure on your travels you'll have come across constituents who work for the council. They're the ones who deliver those services. They're the grafters who work tirelessly to make sure our part of the world is the best it can be, and have been doing so through the worst economic backdrop that we've seen in a generation, and even through a global pandemic. Without our council staff, we would be able to do nothing for our constituents. But this is the worst economic backdrop for a generation. Inflation at its highest since 1992, mortgages at a 15-year high, food prices at a 45-year high. Some of our staffs are going to lose their jobs. That's going to be a 100% pay cut for them, and this is the economy they will be going jobless into. Some of you will be aware of how personal this is for me, and all that is being asked is that we shoulder some of the burden. When every single budget in this council is being cut, so should ours. We are not above this, and we are not an exception. Everyone in this chamber is feeling the pinch, and I understand how difficult this decision is, but we owe it to council employees to stand with them. If we are uncomfortable with taking a personal financial hit, but are comfortable with cutting jobs in this council, we have our priorities all wrong. We must lead by example, we must stand shoulder to shoulder with our workers, and we must take the hit today. Now, I was going to leave my contributions there, but then I saw some of the words from members of the Conservative group. Councillor Hall, rather than seeing us all share the pain, wants to make 6 members of this chamber redundant. He wants to rob our communities of their elected voice and taking their democratic rights away under the guise of saving money. That's not a solution, that's a disgrace. The local Conservative website asks, should councillors be punished for the lack of leadership from an administration that has clearly run out of ideas? Just wait until they realise who's been running the country for the past 13 years. It's the public who have been punished for the lack of leadership from a Conservative government that has clearly run out of ideas. It doesn't matter whether it's in Westminster or in this hall tonight, it's the same old Tories. The only budget they're willing to protect is their own pay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor David Hall. Point of order, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under Council Procedure Rule 24.3, I move that when the vote be taken, we hold a recorded vote on the recommendations outlined in the report. Thank you.
So in order to do that, you need to have at least 5 people who will support that. Okay, I think there's 5.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. We can do that. Councillor David Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say I was surprised and extremely disappointed that Councillor Scott announced this in the press before there was any consultation with, I presume, any elected members. Not sure whether when she consulted her own group about it. It's true, savings can be made in members' allowances. I'm sure we can find some agreement across that. There is a proper process by which that happens, which is an independent panel. I think it's a serious error of judgment for the leader to push ahead with this tonight as proposed. Now, each member will take a view on whether he or she can afford to forego a proportion of their allowance. But to ask councillors to reveal whether they can afford it or not in public by recorded vote is unforgivably crass.
There are members who cannot afford to take a 5% pay cut. I know that because I've spoken to them. And to apply such intimidation in the council chamber is abominable. We wouldn't treat members of the public like that, and I really hope you're not going to treat your officers like this either. I would have hoped Mr. Mayor, if members are feeling intimidated, then they are subject to intimidation. To apply such intimidation...
Councillor Hall, 1 second. Councillor Scott.
May I continue, please, Mr. Mayor?
Councillor Hall, can you please be mindful of the language that you are using towards...
Indeed.
Thank you.
You will know, Mr. Mayor, that my language is always very carefully chosen.
Thank you, Councillor.
And I address the council leader not as a man or a woman or anything else, but as council leader. We wouldn't want to subject members of the public like this or officers. I would have hoped that Councillor Scott would have acted with more decency. This could have been settled discreetly, and the only possible explanation for not doing so is that the Labour group wants to shame members who can't afford it into taking a pay cut. And to apply that pressure to some of our more financially vulnerable members is really reaching a new low. And which two councillors will be getting a huge pay rise when the rest of us take a cut? The leader and the deputy leader. As it stands, I have no intention at all of revealing my personal circumstances or financial circumstances in public. We will not support this motion for that purpose, and if it is carried, my group will not be participating in this charade. It's an absolute pantomime, Mr. Mayor, and it shouldn't have even got onto the order paper tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. Point of order, Councillor Bolt. Councillor Bolt, before you do your point of order, may I just suggest that we suspend CPR 5.5 by a show of hands so that we can carry on with the key discussion item, which was to be taken no later than 7 p.m. after this item and after a short break. Can we have a show of hands?
Mr. Mayor, we're of one mind. That's what I was going to suggest. Sit
down, Councillor Ball. Thank you very much.
Thank you for agreeing with me, Mr. Mayor.
I said it first. Show of hands. We okay with that? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Ball, for your assistance. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll begin by saying Kirklees Liberal Democrats will be voting for this item tonight, but there are a few things to be said about this proposal before we sign up. The first part is how we got here. The last time an increase was approved by this council, it was hastily done with 3 lines to the proposal that totally ignored the independent panel completely. It also, when we knew what was happening to the cost of living, ignored the other reasonable path to reject a raise. And before there's a simplistic retort of you didn't have to take the raise, it wasn't the money that made us angry. It was the lack of process. It was the lack of process. The lack of accountability. It was members in this chamber not knowing what the percentage rise was, what that meant in terms of cash amounts, and yet still voting it through. Councillor Homewood, don't belittle the process in this situation. It's all about the process. It really is. It's all about the process. If we don't have that, then we've got people just making stuff up as we go along. Whichever way you cut it, it was a mess that should never have happened. And I would have hoped that if this was an attempt to clear up that mess, you would have cleaned it up all up by reversing the 7.6% rise you agreed last time. We could have done that unilaterally, yes. We could have brought an amendment to this item, I'm pretty sure. But there's no point fighting gesture politics with more gesture politics. We'd rather see the system mended. I think the most regrettable thing about this business is that there was no discussion about this beforehand. Announced in the press, it was the very opposite of doing with, not to principles that we should be practicing if we want to preach them. What this sequence of events masked is that we have allowances, why we have allowances in the first place. Recompense for time, materials, fuel, use of home tech like internet and printers and the like are necessary so that we don't go back to the dark days of only independently wealthy or separately funded could entertain representing their communities. There are members in all parties here who buy hours from work to do our work, or in some cases reduce business activity to serve their residents. Those will be hit harder by this proposal. It's not an equal cut, it's not an even cut. It's in that way, it's regressive. The lack of anonymity in this particular vote places them in the spotlight unfairly, and in that way, I do agree with the Conservative group here. All of this said, I'd hope that this item draws a line of under what's gone before and brings back the issue back into a more regulated framework. The genie is part way out of the bottle now. Though there are calls for halving allowances, doing away with them altogether, fewer councillors, all sorts of populist suggestions. Now, I would advise the new leader in cabinet to make this a regulated thing and to not do knee-jerk actions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Councillor Marchington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to agree with what Councillor Ramsey said. This is not the most important debate that we're going to have this evening. And that is because the sums involved compared to the amount of money you have to save are relatively small. We're talking about in the region of £100,000 when we're looking to make £20 million worth of savings this year and £27 million next year. And it just creates the impression, while we want to show solidarity with our residents, and we want to show solidarity with the members of the council, officers of the council who are feeling their jobs under threat, this isn't necessarily the right way to do it. What really worries me, and Councillor Lawson's emphasised this as well, is about what went wrong in the first place. In the report to Corporate and Governance Audit, it seemed to indicate that we'd just got ourselves into a financial crisis. And we were well aware of that last September when the council voted for an uncosted rise in the council. And I think that's the thing that's applicable to everything, uncosted. We should not be approving anything that's uncosted, either a rise. I understand we shouldn't be doing that with the decision made by Cabinet the other week, but also we shouldn't be making uncosted savings, because we need to understand the economy of the council and the economy of the way that we do things. And that's what worries me. Councillor Ramsey is probably quite right. We're going to, the small reduction in the allowances will save, might save one job, two jobs, it depends where we're looking at it, but it's not going to save the 250 jobs that we know are in the redundancies in the pipeline, and that's only the beginning. The onus is on all of us to make sure this council is run as efficiently as possible. And the reason that we were given allowances in the first place in the early 20s, 2003, was to ensure that diversity of people in the council that Councillor Addy referred to make sure that we are able to focus on improving this delivery of services to local residents. And that's what we've tried to do over the years. And we want all members of the council, particularly Cabinet, who receive significantly more allowances than the rest of us, to look at how they're going to do things better, how they're going to deliver services more efficiently, and at times pointing out that thing that numbers are very good at, that central government is not giving us sufficient funding, but not just to say it's not sufficient. What services do we need to be delivering, and how much is it realistically cost to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marchington. Councillor Greaves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I don't feel bullied, but it does feel a little bit tokenistic. And more so, I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity. Within my submission to the boundary review, I felt that actually by radically changing the council, we could save real amounts of money. This proposal will save around 100,000, but radically changing the council would save millions, and that would save a lot of jobs. How would we do it? Well, with the boundary review, we could look to move to 4-year all-out elections. We could look to move to single-member wards. We could look to reduce the number of councillors. All that would save a tremendous amount of money, tremendous amount of allowances, expenses, and officer time. If we're serious about making the savings that we need to do, then it's those kind of radical changes we need to look at. I have to say that I'm prepared to forego the allowance, but I'll be holding on to that until this council releases the millions of pounds that it's withholding from my schools. So when that money comes through to the schools, I'll be happy to hand over the money that's being withheld. Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
I was going to use all my time, but I've only got a couple of points to make. One is some time ago I mentioned in council that the allowance and our role was a vocational one, and that the allowance was as important as everybody was making out voting for the increase in the allowance. Now, with the bad case of misandry, then we are now told to take the cuts. And all I have to say is, yes, I will volunteer to the necessary officers what I deem necessary to take in a cut, but I will not stand here in front of full council and declare what I'm prepared to do. And on behalf of the people that cannot afford to take a cut, I think it would be only fair that they did that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few months ago, Mr. Mayor, I was among the last people living in Britain who could truthfully say that I have had a Labour government for the majority of my life, being born in May 97. I was halfway through secondary school when the Conservative and Liberal Democrat coalition came to power and immediately started implementing austerity. And just look at what's happened to the country. Look at the conversations we're being forced to have. The mood music for my entire adult life has been this: what to cut, which services will be weaker, who's going to be worse off this year and by how much. Public services have done nothing but get weaker, living standards are falling, and poverty grows like a cancer. Mr. Mayor, the item before us on members' allowances has something at its heart which I know is alien to the annals of Conservative ideology. It is an act of solidarity. Solidarity with every struggling family, with every one of our workers, and with every person who has suffered at the hands of austerity. Every Labour member here understands that, because that's what the Labour movement is all about, standing side by side and shoulder to shoulder with each other for the common good of all of us. Not standing on the steps of private mansions with bank accounts full of millions of pounds telling everybody else to hold your nerve. That is something that is deeply embedded in my Christian socialism, to stand side by side and shoulder to shoulder with the poorest, the struggling, the least well protected, and those who need help, which, after 13 years of Conservative government cuts and underfunding, turns out to be most of the workers in Britain. And if we here today can make a difference, if we can, by making a small personal sacrifice, protect a vital service, or save even one family from the inhumane cruelty of universal credit, another degradation foisted on us in the last 13 years, then so be it. It's worth it. We should not be in this position, but we are. And I know whose side I'm on. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Turner.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I will generally be brief. I've got a quote for you. We are all in this together. We can't have one group against another, divided, denounced and demonised. We need effort from everyone. We are all in this together. Now that was George Osborne as the Chancellor of the Exchequer at a Tory party conference. He got a standing ovation for that. A standing ovation. We didn't believe we were all in it together then. We don't believe we're in it all together now, as ably demonstrated by our colleagues across the way there. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Taylor.
I'll try and keep this brief as well. One of the values of this council is to be kind to people. And that's what worries me about this proposal. It isn't being kind. It isn't thinking about the impact on those who will struggle financially to make that cut. I've said from the beginning, I have no problem with it, fully support it, quite happy to take a cut. But I do worry about other people. It's not about me, it's about other people. And to actually bring forward a proposal in a way that tries to ask every individual publicly to commit to taking a cut when it may cause their family real financial difficulties isn't being kind. And that's why we won't be supporting this. And I do think it sets the wrong tone for the new administration. I have enormous respect for Cathy as an individual, and I wish her well as leader of this council. But this was the wrong thing to do. This was the wrong impression to give to people. And I'm really, really sad that it's been done in this way. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Safdar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Should I tell you what's being said out there? That all us politicians are the same. I'm sick of challenging that false narrative. I've been told that people like you, working class lads like me, and all the members here have got our hands in the pot. So with this very, very decent, noble proposal, we're showing solidarity with those who are going to lose their jobs, who are struggling with this Conservative cost of living crisis. While services and staff battle with inflation and chronic underfunding from this government, this failed ERG, strange Brexit cabal that have crashed the economy, this Conservative living crisis has caused so much damage to councils like ours, like Birmingham, like so many councillors who are struggling to deliver key services. As the father of a special needs child, I'm having to make sacrifices. So we, as a group, are making sacrifices with this proposal. It may only save 4 or 5 jobs, but this is important, and this is showing the public that we are not like this stereotypical view of politicians all being in it for themselves. We are here for the people. People are struggling out there, and our staff need to know that we stand with them in solidarity. Thank you.
Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This will be short. How can we all stand here in front of people who have walked past metal trees costing £250,000 and say we're making a real saving for this town by saving potentially 100 grand by getting individual people to stand up and say, actually, I can't afford to pay my bills. I think it's shocking. I think you need to get your priorities right. Thank you.
Any further comments? If not, we will go to the vote. We will have a recorded vote, and Julie will describe what will happen next.
Are we going to a right to reply. Just a quick go.
Councillor Homewood.
I did just want to respond to two things. Just firstly to Councillor Lawson, just to clarify what I was meaning, I wasn't suggesting that the process and the governance isn't important. I was just talking specifically about the recommendation and how we make the decision, where I felt we could be a little bit of unnecessary, complicating it unnecessarily. But just to then ignore my own points and go on to the process, I just wanted to respond to Councillor Hall, because I think we are following the proper steps. We suggest, one of the recommendations is that we set up a members review panel. The problem that we've got is if we don't take a decision today, what might actually happen is that we get accidentally an increase in allowances because of what we've already agreed in the past. And, you know, I think it was Councillor Almer who was kind of talking about suggesting that, you know, Labour was indecisive and things. But then when we get a situation we're trying to be decisive, that, you know, told that's intimidation. And actually, you know, I think we need to just think about that and think about the process. And just to come back to it again, any decision that a councillor makes to take a voluntary reduction in their allowances is public information. And if we passed a motion that just said people make their independent decision, people will look back and just check what those members did. So all we're doing by agreeing it at the council meeting is making it really clear what decision the council has made and quite transparent. So I think if you actually think about it, I don't think those concerns that you're raising actually materialise in reality. And one last point, we know about the actual members review panel. If in the future a members review panel does recommend a reduction in allowances, that would be approved and could apply to all members. It doesn't take account of individual circumstances in that respect either. So doing it in that way does not change the fact of it may be difficult for some people to take a reduction. So overall, I don't see the points that you've made really having, you know, really materialising into an issue from my perspective. Thank you.
Julie.
Okay, can I just clarify a couple of things about how we're going to take this vote? And the first thing I want to ask is, you stood up and you asked for a recorded vote. Are we taking a recorded vote on the three recommendations together? Is that the... Okay, all right, so it would be a yes, a no, abstain. Okay, right, so I'm going to, because we're not in the council chamber and we can't use equipment, I am going to read out everybody's name. Can you shout your response, please? A yes, a no, or abstain? And I'm going to repeat it on here because I know that it's difficult for people watching this on webcast to hear everybody in the room, particularly if you're distanced from this, okay? So, you've done this before, so listen carefully for your names. It's primarily in alphabetical order, apart from council leaders first, group leaders first. So, Councillor Cathy Scott. That's a 4. Councillor David Hall. That's against. Councillor John Lawson. That's a 4. Councillor Cooper. That's a 4. Councillor Addy.
Councillor Hall.
Make it clear, please, that we're voting on the 4 recommendations in the motion now. We're not responding personally.
Yes.
That's right, isn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry, yes, that's right. Apologies if that wasn't clear when I asked the question. So we're voting for all 4, okay? So, Councillor Addy, that's a 4. Councillor Masood Ahmed, that's a 4. Councillor Itrat Ali, that's against. Councillor Karen Allison, that's a 4. Councillor Amin, thank you, that's a 4. Councillor Anwar, that's a 4. Councillor Armour, that's an against. Councillor Bamford, that's against. Councillor Bellamy, that's against. Councillor Bolt. That's against. Councillor Burke, the Mayor. 4. Councillor Crook. That's a 4. Councillor Paul Davies. That's a 4. Councillor Dockrat. That's a 4. Councillor Firth isn't here, is he? No. Councillor Eric Firth. Okay, that's a 4. Councillor Charles Greaves. Okay, that's an abstention. Councillor Hall. That's a 4. Councillor Hawkins. That's a 4. Councillor Holmes. That's against. Councillor Homewood. That's a 4. Councillor Hussain. That's a 4. Councillor Kaushik. That's a 4. Councillor Kendrick. That's a 4. Councillor Khan. That's a 4. Councillor Joe Lawson. That's a 4. Councillor Lee Richards. That's a 4. Councillor Lees Hamilton. That's against. Councillor Lowe. Okay, so Councillor Lowe's not here in the room at the moment. Okay. Councillor Marchington. That's a 4. Councillor Mather. Also not here. Okay. Councillor McCarthy. That's a 4. Councillor McGrath. That's against. Councillor McGuinn. That's against. Councillor McKirker. That's a 4. Councillor McLaughlin. That's a 4. Councillor Moore. That's a 4. Councillor Munro. That's a 4. Councillor O'Donovan. That's a 4. Councillor Pandor. That's a 4. Councillor Patterson. That's a 4. Councillor Pervez. That's a 4. Councillor Amanda Pinnock. That's a 4. Councillor Andrew Pinnock. That's a 4. Councillor Ramsey. That's a 4. Councillor Reynolds. Thank you. Councillor Safdar. That's a 4. Councillor Sheard. That's against. Councillor Will Simpson. That's a 4. Councillor Smage. Against. Councillor Anthony Smith. That's a 4. Councillor Richard Smith. That's against. Councillor Sokol. That's a 4. Councillor Stephen. I don't think she's here, is she? No. Councillor Taylor. That's against. Councillor Thompson. That's against. Councillor Turner. That's a 4. Councillor Uller. That's a 4. Councillor Habiban Zaman. That's a 4. Okay, thank you very much for that. I think that looks like it's clearly carried.
There was 43 for, 15 against, and 1 abstention. Thank you. That's the end of item 11. We're going to have a short break and we'll return to item 16, the key discussion. Thank you.
Members of the Council, honoured guests, please be upstanding for the worshipful, the Mayor of Kirklees, Councillor Cahal Burke.
See, nobody even noticed.
Okay, members, just to clarify that the vote that we just had in relation to members' allowances, of course, it's a personal decision by everyone about the allowances. So I will be writing to every member of the council tomorrow to clarify with them what their intentions are. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor McGrath, would you like to...
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify. So could I, in theory, have stood up in front of the cameras and said yes to the 4, making it appear that I was willing to take a 5% reduction in my allowances, and then in an email say no, it not be reported upon, and then you'd have to look into my actual allowances to find out whether I'd done it or not?
Yes, that's the case.
So, just to clarify, you're not going to publish something separately to say these people said yes, these people said no in the minutes. So, in the minutes of the meeting, it could say one thing, and then in your response by email, it could say something else. That's what concerns me, is it could be in written record in the minutes that I said yes to it, and then actually something else could then happen via email at a later date.
That's the case.
Okay, I just want to clarify. That's perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Mr. Mayor, just for clarity, the reason I and I think some other members voted against that motion was because we were unhappy with the wording that suggested that individual members were going to be asked in this hall to stand up and say whether they wish to forego that allowance or not. Had that not been in the motion, I wouldn't have been voting against it. So I just want people to be really, really clear about where my group was and what the reasons why we voted in the way we did. Had it been a simple motion to say we were asking, which is what I suggested in Corporate Governance and Audit yesterday, which was to suggest to everyone that in principle we agree with members foregoing the increase, but it's a voluntary thing and they all indicate that in private, so if they have financial difficulties, they're not forced to say so publicly. That could have been something that the council was unanimous on. And I think it's disappointing that the way it was done, the way it's played out, suggests that there's disagreement when perhaps there isn't that much disagreement in the first place. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor, for the clarification. Councillor Holmes.
Can you please just clarify what happens if you don't reply to the email?
If you don't reply to the email, then it will be assumed that the increase in allowances in accordance with the officer increase will be given, and there will be no reduction of 5%.
Thank you. We're going to move on. So reply to the email, don't reply to the email. It's up to you. It's your choice. Item 16, key discussion addressing the Council's financial challenge. This evening's key discussion will be addressing the Council's financial challenge. Can I invite Councillor Scott to give a brief presentation and introduce the key discussion item?
Mr. Mayor. Okay.
Kirklees is one of hundreds of councils facing immense financial pressures. The word crisis doesn't really do it justice to the situation in English local government. The LGA estimates there's over £3 billion black hole in council finances. That's why residents all over the country are seeing the local services squeezed. They deserve to know why, and that's crucial why we're here tonight. They deserve to know how we're going to overcome these challenges and our plan to avoid the fate of Birmingham. The latest, but almost certainly not the last council to declare bankruptcy. That's why I welcome tonight's budget debate later. Ever since the economic crisis began, we've been open with the public about the challenges, and we will continue with that approach in the difficult months to come. So it's important that we get the context around this. So how did we get here? The past 18 months has proved to be one of the most difficult, chaotic periods in recent British economic history. The most immediate effect of the chaos has been inflation, which has run at over 10% for most of the year. Inflationary pressures on energy, goods, services, it all added around 25 million to our cost in the last financial year alone. Even though inflation has dipped in recent months, prices are still increasing at a rate that we haven't seen for decades. But there have been pressures on our budgets that go far way back than what you're seeing now. Demand for vital services like supporting children who need extra care help, and of course in adult social care, are increasing all the time. In the past year alone, we've seen a 15% increase in the number of users accessing home care services. Someone once promised, this is funny, to sort social care funding out. We're still waiting for that pledge to be honoured. But of all the pressures that frustrates me the most, it's the underfunding that we have in Kirklees and places like ours. And I know other local authorities are going to say the same here. So how can any government justify the Institute of Fiscal Studies finding that residents in Batley get less local government funding than in Buckinghamshire? The system is broken. It's a national disgrace, and it penalises people in Kirklees every single year. Even introducing the proper floor of funding calculations would have given an extra 17 million a year, and it would have cost Kirklees taxpayers virtually nothing. That's why we're lobbying for change, alongside councils and all political parties. Again, the government agrees with us. They agreed that 7 years ago. They launched a fair funding review. But again, we wait for that pledge to be honoured. The government is learning that if they ignore us for 7 years, it will get worse and catastrophically worse. And that's what's happening. So in recent years, we've also, cannot forget, even before Brexit and the pandemic, the Trussonomics. Austerity. It's already ripped at least 200 million out of our budget every year. That's the Conservative estimate, literally. We're talking at least £1 billion that we should have gone into our communities, but it didn't. And we finally moved away from pushing austerity. The council has made choices. We've invested in children's services, and that's nothing more important that we need to do. And we pledged the austerity should not be repeated in public realm. So we needed to invest in our economy and our infrastructure. Despite the pandemic, we stayed true to our pledges. In all that time, and despite the long-running pressures, we've been a prudent council. And I need to commend your staff, Jackie. They've been outstanding. We've always kept a level of reserves and that would protect services against economic shocks. I've lost count at the number of times I've heard councillors in this chamber and outside say, spend our reserves. And I shudder to think of the consequences if we'd have taken that advice. Spending our reserves would have been the most single catastrophic decision ever made in this council chamber. When the economic crisis duly arrived, we were able to mitigate some of it. In line with the government advice, we used our reserves to protect our services, and that was over 100 million spent to date. But the fact is, the cost of living crisis persists. Demands, pressures are increasing, and the underfunding continues to be built into this system. So for slides 4 and 5, it actually demonstrates to you what's going on. So the next two slides, we're trying to simplify the flashpoints that you can see over the past 2 years. They show a number of complex factors that have combined to leave us with one simple, sobering challenge. It means we need to find 47.8 million in savings before this council sets its budgets next year. And that is the bottom line. The question that's facing us all is, how do we meet these challenges? We've already taken tough decisions and actions to reduce the cost, spending controls and recruitment freeze. Additionally, income generation, accelerated asset disposal, and an ongoing review of the capital plan, amongst other things. We've brought forward some saving proposals and income generation plans, and we've planned that for later in the year. All these things are reducing costs, but the scale of the challenge means we need to go further. The medium financial term strategy tells us how we will do that, and in a way that is fair as possible and in tune with this council and our values. This means growing Kirklees' economy, delivering new housing, and making sure our infrastructure attracts further investment. After all, thriving economies begin with revenue to councils, and it protects residents for future economic shocks. The plan also means finding more efficient ways in delivering services to residents, reducing management and administration costs, as well as the scope of some services. It will also mean recovering a great proportion of the costs in some services which are currently being subsidised, and making sure that the use of technology and our assets is in the most efficient way as possible. Finally, the plan describes how the council will prioritise the funding towards people, families and organisations that need its service the most of where they can have the most impact. And that's the most important thing. That's what we're about here as councillors. Our financial planning is in line with our priorities we've already set out in our various strategies. You can see the context on the slides shown. The challenging situations, it's also more important to stay true to our values, and I will keep emphasising that, and the ambition that we set here in Kirklees to a bigger picture. So where do we go from here? We've asked council directorates to shape their budgets for next year. Cabinet colleagues will scrutinise and shape their plans over the coming months. On top of that, we have asked for saving proposals to be brought forward and implemented within the current year. The earlier we can implement the savings, the easier it will be to close the deficit. And in the coming weeks, Cabinet will debate some of those. We will be open with residents and our workforce about them. We will consult on the budget later in autumn. And I just finish by making one more point. Kirklees residents and the brilliant staff shouldn't be paying the price of the government economic incompetence and their indifference to the public services. They shouldn't be paying the price of a funding system that was so manifestly unfair. They shouldn't be paying the price of more than a decade of failure to tackle the country's most pressing issues. Those failures mean some of the savings we need to make will be painful, and that's being honest. But the consequences for vital services would be far worse if we don't balance this budget. Sustainable funding underpins everything we do, and what our plan will do is to deliver, and I'm commending it to you tonight in this chamber. I now open this up for the conversation to be had, because I think there's some really challenging issues here in Kirklees, and whether we like it or not, we've got to make a difference. We're representing our communities, and we need to make a difference for Kirklees. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. I can just remind members we have 1 hour for this item. We started at 7:52, we'll finish at 8:52, and we have 2 other items, that is item 12 and 14, that we need to take before we finish, so if you could be mindful of that. Comments? Councillor Cooper.
It was a previous leader of this council, David Sheard, who was once criticising the government. I don't think it was when he was leader, but he was the Robert Light, who was leader of the Tories at the time, got up and said, "You're criticising the Labour government. You're criticising the Labour government." He said, "Look, lad," he said, I think he said, "Look, lad," he said, "whoever's in power, the government is the enemy." That sort of stuck with me, really, because when you look at actually the Labour Party's proposals for local government, there is not very much there in terms of fiscal devolution. It's lacking. There's no real proposals out there on how they would deal with funding for local government. I mean, what's actually needed for local government is similar powers that are achieved for Scotland and Wales and the devolved nations that we could have for ourselves in terms of the funding that is available and the powers that we have. And that's something that would actually level up a lot of the country, something that we don't really see much from Labour about how it would level up. I'm not saying the Tories levelling up's any good whatsoever. Let's not mistake that. So in terms of this debate, there's a big question really about what we as councillors can do. What is it the difference that we can make? When we put our motion forward to the council, the 10 ideas that we got that we thought would make a difference, we thought that was something that other parties would build upon, that they would put their amendments in, hopefully friendly amendments, and that would bring the council together as an organisation which would collaborate on dealing with the problems that we face. Unfortunately, our motion is not going to get debated tonight because we'll get a cut-off at 9 o'clock. Unfortunately, I doubt that the debate will be extended, and our motion will not get debated. And so there's nothing to vote upon here, nothing at all. We'd asked for a number of things, one of which was a corporate opportunities register. We have a corporate risk register where we look at risks that the council has. But what we don't do is actually look at opportunities. We do not look at the monies in a systematic way, the money that we could apply for. We don't look systematically at the partnerships that we could do. We don't systematically look at the work we do with the voluntary and community sectors. We do this work, but we don't do it in a systematic way like we do with risk. And I think there's some real missing opportunities there, because the voluntary and community sector can access funding that we can't as a council, and can do things which we are also trying to achieve. So there's a value in doing that. Looking at working patterns for employees, there are some councils which have done experiments successfully with 4-day week working, where we'll be able to maintain the staff that we've got, but have different working patterns. And I think that's something that we'd like to look at in consultation with trade unions. Local lotteries have been used successfully by a number of councils and brought in hundreds of thousands of pounds, which have helped the voluntary and community sector, some of the organisations which could well suffer under the funding cuts that we may well have to pass on. So those are areas we could look at. And another thing that I think is really important if we're looking at the culture of the council is to say, we have the normal charade that we go through each year of having the budget debate, where we put our motions in, everybody votes everybody down, and that's that, and we all go home. But why not actually have a process whereby we see what we can agree on? Fit in some time before that to say, actually, this is an amendment from the whole council on the budget. This is an amendment that we all sign up to, and collaborate and work together on that. A number of other things in here about gain share, funding from West Yorkshire Combined Authority, using that a bit better, looking how we might collaborate with West Yorkshire councils on back office functions a little bit more effectively. So those are some of the ideas we wanted to talk about tonight, some of the things that we actually wanted to vote upon. And I'd have been interested to see what other parties put forward. Liberal Democrats, they put a motion forward, nothing from the Conservatives. Just how do we get out of our cuts to our allowances? You know, that was interesting. I'm disappointed that our motion is not being looked at, and let's try and change the culture of the council in future to make sure there is more debate and more votes on things which can actually make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson.
I think for once I might agree with Councillor Cooper, actually, reference to changing the culture of the council and the decisions. I've got here a list of the top 10 councils in the UK. Councils that are awarded their position in the list of all councils through their diligence and also in their awards for the important issues that councils run, adult services, housing, highways, etc. And it's strange that Kirklees are on there, but there are two of our neighbouring councils on there. One is Barnsley and one is Calderdale. And I know people from these councils, and they never really lambast anybody for the lack of money, because they're busy away trying to stay up into the top 10 of the councils in this country, while Kirklees over the last 18 years has slipped into oblivion by mismanagement and lack of control and lack of diligence on the jobs that the Cabinet should be doing. So instead of parroting at every possible chance reference to governments, it's the government's fault. Maybe it's lousy financial control and lousy management of the council, rather than finger pointing like cheap magicians, shaking the left hand and hopefully not realising or not allowing people to see what's going on with the right hand. By the way, it's 8 years that Conservatives have been in government, not 13. I just wanted to clarify another mistake on sums. So, inflation is high. Yes, it is. It usually is when money's been printed. Not as high as when your hero Harold Wilson was in government and when it was 24%, not 11%. So we do need to remember that over the past decades, when Labour has been in control of the government, it's been even worse than what you think it is now. There's never been a good financial management of the government when Labour have been in power, apart from when Tony Blair was in power and he kept the fiscal policy of the Thatcher government for a few years, but then obviously his right-hand man ruined that over the next 5 years that he was in charge. So, moving on to salient points, reference to Barnsley, Wakefield, Sunderland, they didn't wait. They didn't wait until the austerity as it's called, got too bad. They took action during that period of time, and there's been a £500 million uplift in Sunderland's council's infrastructure during that period of time. Barnsley have done exceptionally well with some of the officers with us now. But it seems that Kirklees couldn't get out of the inertia. So now it's almost knee-jerk or defib management that we have now, where we have to be seen to be doing something because there's nothing left that we can make excuses about. So, are we going to become progressive? Are we going to become diligent? Are we going to move forward and do our best? Well, what I've got to say, reference to the Cabinet and other members of the Council, is what have you been doing for the last 15, 16 years while you've been losing points in the Council's table until you're in the bottom 10 percentile of practically every department within Council? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At our last full council meeting, Councillor Bull recalled the halcyon days of 2006, and Councillor Thompson's just taken us down memory lane as well. At risk of making Martin and a few others feel their age, I was 10 years old in 2006. And Martin's favourite app, Twitter, had just been created as well. And we did have a Conservative administration in Kirklees. But who was the government in 2006? It was a Labour government that delivered record investment in councils like Kirklees, lifted 1 million pensioners and 600,000 children out of poverty, doubled funding for every pupil in England, created 220,000 Sure Start centres, 36,000 more teachers, 85,000 more nurses, 32,000 more doctors, 14,000 more police officers, slashed NHS waiting lists and oversaw the longest sustained period of low inflation since the 60s. And here we are, 17 years later, 13 of which have been under Tory rule, Tory Prime Ministers, I should say, Mark. And what do we have for show for it? A 17% cut in local councils' funding, near 50% of patients spending more than 4 hours in A&E, a record 7.5 million people on NHS waiting lists, 90% of schools saying they're at risk of running out of money, food prices at record highs, inflation through the roof, mortgage levels at a 15-year high, national debt over 100% of GDP, the first time that's happened since 1961, and the highest tax burden for 70 years. My, how far we've fallen. This report is but a snapshot as what we're seeing across the country, having to make yet more savings after years of being cut. Well, I think we're a bit past the bone now and into the marrow. In fact, Mark pulled out a top 10 list. I've got one of my own here. Of the 10 local authorities with the highest deficits this year, 5 of them are Conservative run. Every single member of this chamber knows that after a decade of austerity, nothing in this country is working. And why is that? Is it all just down to bad luck, a collection of events outside anyone's control, or is it a realisation of a wider Conservative vision? Defunding the public sector, complaining when they can't deliver like before, all the while espousing the virtues of the private sector. The average nursery bill for a family with a child under 2 has increased 44% since 2010. While NHS waiting lists have spiralled due to underinvestment, the number paying for private healthcare has risen by 10% in that time. Famously, although Lib Dem councillors may want to forget this, tuition fees are now £9,250 a year for most students. The number of private leisure centres has more than doubled since 2010, whilst local leisure centres like ours are at risk of closing. And the average UK house price was, back in 2010, £170,000. It is now £287,000. So I ask, do you want your children and grandchildren to go to nursery? Do you want them to see a doctor fast? Do you want them to go to university? Do you want them to stay fit and healthy? Do you want them to own their own home? Well, guess what? In 2023, they can, for a price. The opportunities afforded to those previous generations are there for the next, for a price which is becoming more and more unaffordable and is only affordable to an exclusive elite. I think the people of Kirklees have been paying far too high a price for their government's failings for far too long. No wonder Martin and others are looking back for inspiration. Under his party's stewardship, I see no hope for the future unless we have change. a change in direction, a change in values, and a change in leadership. Back in 2006, Twitter's logo was that little blue bird, although this past year they've changed it to an X. Next year, I hope people will take their X at the ballot box and vote for a Labour government, a transformative Labour government. Thank you.
Councillor Marchington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's quite clear that our view of what things are like now are dependent on when we were born. And I just want to start with my history. I was born in 1967. I started school in 1972, went to Gokir County Infant School built by the West Riding. Kirklees didn't come into being until 1974. Kirklees, when it came into being, was notorious. It spent some of the lowest amounts of money on children anywhere in the country. And actually, when I went to secondary school, it went from the fourth worst to the worst, the lowest spending per child. I know when I've mentioned that before in the chamber, I was being criticised by Molly Walton, who's no longer with us, about, there wasn't enough money. It was only when the Tories introduced formula funding that the average amount of money spent per child's education in Kirklees came up to the median level. And what that tells me, it's really sad when you're relying on central government to try and sort things out for you. And not all local government works as well as it ought to do. And actually, the 18 years ago that we're referring to here, when Kirklees was the best council in the country, that was built on work from across party, Greens, Liberal Democrats, Labour and Conservative. Well, that's what we were all told at the time. And it has been a bit of a slippery slope since then. The debate is about the current financial crisis. And what upsets me a little bit is we know there's not enough money, and the group of people, the organisation that's primarily responsible for that is central government. Thank you for reminding us, Andrew, that David Sheard reminded us that central government is always the enemy. They hold too much power, they control it. We cannot shape the local, the lives of our residents the way we'd want to do. And all of us say something really sensible. I think it was Richard Smith who said a few councils ago about when's it going to stop? When's it going to stop? About how much more money. It's not about how much more money you need. It's what money do we need? What sort of council do we want to be? To deliver the best education that all of us want, whatever the political, to make sure that our older residents and those with particular disabilities are looked after in the way that we would want to be. Although that's only for us, most of us, thank God, will not end up like that, but we might be looking after parents and stuff. What sort of, the nuts and bolts, what sort of roads do we want? And how can we pay for that? And that's the sort of discussion we should be having. And the trouble is, it's always this, one thing or another. It took the last Labour government 7 years to pluck up the courage to start investing more in local government. Right, Sigoma, it was the Sigoma things. We understood that as the 47 metropolitan authorities weren't getting enough money. It happened in 2005-06, massive uplift. This council went from having a projected deficit to a £9 million surplus in 2006 and to a £15 million to a £9 million surplus and another surplus. And then the Conservative, the counties, we said, well, our counties are not getting money. And actually, that's the element of truth in that. There'll be people in parts of rural Britain that seem to be relatively affluent who are not getting enough. Local government, whether Tory or Labour led, knows that, but we're never listened to. And what we need to be arguing is there needs to be a better way of doing things. It's not like running your household budget where you're cutting your cloth accordingly. What money do we need for a world-class health service, a world-class social care, world-class local service, world-class bin collection, world-class police service? How much do we need? And we know there's not enough of the money. And then it's who's best placed to deliver that? I didn't get a chance to say thank you, Jackie, but I'll just embarrass you again. When this council integrated its health and social care strategy with its economic strategy, Jackie used the phrase, a ladder of opportunity. Ladder of opportunity, and I don't know whether it's your phrase or not, but that's what we need for everybody. From the Ken Davies of this place, or the Lawrence Battleys it was, who earn vast amount of money, to those people who are always in poverty. Because I was working on a food bank in the 1990s when Matthew was born and Tyler wasn't even born. It's been there. It's just, you know. But that was it. We were doing food runs from Gledholt Methodist Church with beef off the beef mountain. It's just become more apparent. And there'll be people tonight who are fine. They'll be one of the ones who've got the 8% pay rise, or the pensioners who are on full pension who will be doing very well. Oh, be nice uplift next to April, Jackie, will it? We won't ask you how much. But there'll be still people tonight who are going hungry, whose parents were going hungry and grandparents are going hungry. So it's structures. What structures do we need to put in place? That's the long-term thing. It's not about more money or less money. We know there's not enough money, but how much do we need to deliver the service, and what sort of services do we want to deliver? It's a top-to-bottom reform, not just rearranging the deck chairs, whoever's got the bums on the green seats in Westminster. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ramsey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I was prepared this time. Thank you. I thought Councillor Scott gave us a very clear history about where we've been. I feel as though I'm totally motivated by the values that you're expressing around how we deal with what the situation is now. That's great. And I think Councillor Hawkins, your reference to where we need to be when it comes to the general election and why, I thought that was really well made. We know that councils are chronically underfunded. We don't see this just here in Kirklees, but in other areas, and make no mistake, we know it's due to the cuts that have been overseen by the Conservative-led government over the last 13 years. Unfortunately, I think they've systematically undervalued the services that are being provided by local government. And it seems that this is to continue, because if we note in the finance report for agenda item number 12, we'll see that the spring statement was commented on by the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and it says that in real terms, local government is subject to a further reduction of 3.2% over the next 3 years. So austerity hasn't ended for us in local government, and that's really why we need to look forward to a general election. On top of that, Kirklees Council is particularly underfunded per head of population. Again, if you look at the Institute of Fiscal Studies, their report on the 15th of August made it really clear that we get £69 per person on average, less than the average local authority. If you compare that to when Rishi Sunak was actually boasting to his Conservative members in Tunbridge Wells, and they get, I think it's £65 more based on need. So there's a huge gap between what some councils get and ourselves. So we have been fighting for this fair funding for a long time. The government, I think, was going to look at fair funding, but we are still underfunded. We understand that to achieve a balanced budget, which is our legal duty next year, we need to make some really difficult decisions. And as a responsible administration, we'll have to make them. It doesn't make it easy. In fact, it's going to be painful. And this is the painful reality of living in local government at the moment. But we have a strong leadership team, and we are working together and to ensure we achieve this. But please, let us all understand why we're in this position. I think Cathy made it clear. It's due to this government's short-sightedness with austerity and the abject failure to level up. Our residents have been really let down. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Mayor. So, this is a discussion we've had before, isn't it? Several times. And it's very repetitive, and we're getting through the same points again. Discussion is welcome. And it's probably necessary that we keep having the discussion, actually, just so we can keep moving it along. frustrating, but it is necessary maybe. But we seem to be coming to a watershed now, so to speak. We've come to a point where all the arguments about why we are where we are, arguments on austerity, who started it, the causes, who was going to cut deeper than who, I referenced Jack Straw there, mistakes that were made by central and local government alike, I include my own party in that, the ideological continuation of years of austerity by Conservatives after Liberal Democrats paid the price of the ballot box in 2015, the mistakes made by Kirklees Labour when on occasion the baby was thrown out with the bathwater. We all know, we all have examples of that occurring. These and more are all a matter of record, and everyone pretty much has their own camp, and little can be said to change those views. So what? Where do we go from here? How do we get ourselves out of those camps? Well, the watershed, or maybe crunch might be a better word for this, is that we're in danger of running out of road. Since before March, officers and directors, and to be fair, cabinet members, have been working incredibly hard to make savings and increase income where possible. It's thankless work, and charges and cuts and closures will never be popular. Cabinet have said they have high confidence that the plans they have to make further savings will produce a balanced budget at the year end, and we have no real choice but to take them at their word. But I think it's probably overdue that the details of some of these plans come into public view. I'd hope that they've had ample time to be properly cooked by now. I haven't been party to any of the conversations with the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, but I understand that having those plans in place is a good way to buy the time that we desperately need. I just hope that members don't hear about them in the press first. The issues Council face over the next few years would be a challenge to any administration, but a new leader, Cabinet and CEO are going to need to make sure that strong decision making is at the centre of Council. The best and quickest way to test that governance is to ask the LGA to come to do a peer challenge review, identify strengths and weaknesses, and we should welcome the challenges that that process brings. New Liberal Democrat administrations elsewhere have undertaken to do this voluntarily, where the Cabinet has changed hands. In some cases, they've also voluntarily requested a best value inspection from DLUC. I'm not suggesting a best value inspection, but an LGA review of this sort seems equally valid in a Cabinet with major changes rather than a change of political outlook. I'd add that a skills and competency audit of Cabinet with a subsequent training package would go a long way in both giving confidence to Council and preventing setting members up to fail, members of the Cabinet up to fail. If we can't hear the Liberal Democrat motion today, the request for that LGA peer challenge, then will the leader undertake to discuss these matters at Cabinet? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the risk of sounding like I'm at some sort of peculiar book club, I want to talk about what I've been reading, and obviously Councillor Ramsey's been dipping into it a little bit, but it's fascinating. I've been looking at the Institute of Fiscal Studies report that published this August on looking at how much funding does each area receive. And it looked at last year's funding formula from government and covered mainly 4 areas: council funding, the police, the NHS, public health, also addresses schools, but that's a bit more complex. Some areas of the country receive more funding above the national average, not necessarily on their need. Some areas of the country receive less funding than the national average, not necessarily on their need. And the quote within this study report is, "The system funding local government, accounting for needs and the revenue raising capacity of different areas has broken down." And I absolutely believe what they're saying. For example, the South East would still receive a share of funding 9% higher than its share of spending needs. On the other hand, the North East would receive 5% lower than its needs. And so it led me to have a look at Kirklees. And you know, Kirklees actually features by name in this study. Page 54 if you get into this book. And the quote is, 5 areas receive more than 2% less than their share of funding. And the first name on the list, Kirklees, Leicester, Luton, Southend-on-Sea and Walsall. But we're first in getting less than we should have. I had a look in more detail, because 2% don't sound much, does it? And it looks at how much is given per head of population. And it breaks it down. It's really fascinating. The NHS in Kirklees received minus 6.3% of the national average. The police in Kirklees received minus 7.1% of the national average. And local government, this council, received minus 8% of the national average. And if we're going to talk about league tables, there's a league table in this report. It goes from 1 to 150. And if you're number 1, you get the most funding. Kirklees is 118 on that list. And what do I think it means in Kirklees for 2022-23 last year? I've done a bit of arithmetic. I'm not brilliant, I'll stand to be corrected, but my reckoning says the police in Kirklees receive 6.5 million less than the needs of Kirklees. The NHS in Kirklees received 57.5 million less than the needs of Kirklees. This council, Kirklees Council, received 29,756,000 less funding than it needs in Kirklees. Do I think it's right and fair? I don't. Do the rest of you? Who do I think is responsible? This Conservative government. Just as an aside, I noticed the deputation from Unison and their leaflet about access to education service and its redesign, and their concern for people's jobs, which I have that concern too. I have to say that redesign is a direct result of the government removing the school improvement grant from this council and all others. It's yet another continued erosion of council funding. I finish with drawing colleagues' attention to England's Children's Commissioner, Dame Rachel de Souza. She even appeared in the Huddersfield Examiner, I think it was yesterday, and she said she absolutely will be making the case to government for the need for more and better support for children. And this is particularly in the light of the Chancellor, who she understands is considering real-term cuts to benefits, which all the national charities are saying as unthinkable for the poor families across this country. I know where the problem of funding comes from. Not this council, it's from central government. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This isn't quite the debate that perhaps I was hoping we were going to have. I've always believed in managing what's manageable and focusing on what difference we can make. And I agree that there is a challenge, and I think Councillor Kendrick, sort of articulated it well about some of the challenges where perhaps we're not getting our fair share. And that is an argument that needs to be made and made strongly. But what we need to focus on here is what we can do. And I think the leader, Cathy, said it well earlier on when she said, the earlier we bring forward savings, the easier it will be. And I think by easier, she means in terms of the less pain that will be as a result of having to make difficult choices. But we've known about the problem for a fair while. September last year, we identified that we were projecting a 35 million overspend in 2022-23. And there were numerous discussions where significant actions were going to be taken. We were going to close certain buildings. We were going to freeze recruitment. We were going to stop non-essential spending. But it didn't happen in the way it was proposed. We got to the end of the year and we still overspent by 27 million, which just put pressure on this year and on following years. The budget that was approved by this council was brought forward by the administration. The report we have today in 2.2 in the budget strategy update states that the budget didn't make adequate provision for inflation in all areas, even though by that point in February this year we were very, very clear about the inflationary impact and the cost of living challenge. It also didn't reflect accurately the activity levels in several of the key pressure areas. So again, we didn't do the work we should have done to fully understand the impact and the costs and the pressures that we were under. We talked about freezing recruitment, but there are still over 100 job adverts out there currently for Kirklees. We've talked about stopping non-essential spending, but there are still examples of non-essential spending happening, and I shared one only this week with Cabinet members and with officers. I also would echo Councillor Lawson's comment and plea about sharing more detail with members about what the proposals are, because we are very much in the dark. We have a cross-party budget group that could be taken into confidence, because I fully understand that until we've done the right consultation with members, officers, we certainly can't be sharing publicly what proposals are being brought forward. But currently, there isn't that level of sharing with members outside of the Cabinet, and perhaps there's something we can all do to work together to find the right answers and to work together to solve some of these problems. I must say I was pleased to see that Councillor Scott removed from Councillor Davis responsibility for finance, because I don't feel that he led us in the way perhaps he should have done whilst he was responsible for finance. And perhaps if he'd had more focus on the financial challenges we were facing and less focus on trying to get himself elected as an MP, perhaps we would have been better in terms of bringing things forward. You can laugh if you wish, Paul, but that's the honest truth. And you know from discussions that we've had through scrutiny and other places that we asked questions, we were challenging where the detail was, and that detail wasn't provided. We are where we are. We talk about we want more money from government. The amount of GDP spending that is being spent in the public sector is at the highest level it's ever been. We can't just continue to spend more and more and more, but what we can do is spend it more wisely. And some of that does mean giving this council more money, but we need to be really, really clear that we're laser sharp on how that money is spent, and that we do avoid non-essential spending, and we do stop spending money that we could avoid to do to get us out of this mess. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bolt.
Councillor Hawkins took us back in time to the Labour years, the Blair Brown years. Yes, those halcyon days when Blair took us into a war based on a dodgy dossier and Brown sold off the gold reserves. Those were truly wonderful years, weren't they? As Councillor Cooper has reminded us, the words of Comrade Sheard, central government is always the enemy. Mr. Mayor, any efficient cabinet should concentrate on efficiency, should look at changing old practices where needed, such as in our planning system, so that when large developers, such as one based in the offshore tax haven of the British Virgin Islands, claims it can't afford its fair contribution to our infrastructure, putting money into Cooper Bridge, then they are not let off nearly £500,000 in planning contribution. They are made to pay the fair share. We know that developers will claim they can't afford, but as the late Councillor Paul Kane showed, when they are brought to committee and the opportunity of scrutiny is there, they cough up, Mr. Mayor. So let's not see people get away with things. Let's see developers chased properly by this council so that once again we don't see £80,000 lost from needy education in Lower Hopton because money was failed to be collected. Mr. Mayor, our residents often say that councils can't organise events in a brewery, or words to that effect. What we've seen from this cabinet is they can't even organise a cafe in a leisure centre. They designed, constructed and ran the cafe in the Spenborough Leisure Centre, pulling the shutters down within a year, having said they failed to run it. The then leader, not the current one cafe, the then leader accepted my challenge of getting the private sector in without knowing that his own council pulled the shutters down, pulled the equipment out, and therefore it was unfeasible and unrealistic. It had gone back. It was going to be a retail area. So why didn't you let the private sector run it? Where was your business plan? And this is something that should run throughout. If you can't have an efficient business plan for a cafe, how can the public choose and understand that you have a business plan for your more grandiose projects like a hotel, like blueprints and other things, Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor, we should also look at getting best value on contracts. I'm told by one former local business owner that the council refused their ability to tender to take the legal and planning notices from this council. That contract was then put to a Scottish advertising agency who relet it to a multinational company. That, I'm told, cost thousands of pounds, Mr. Mayor, and led to the loss of 30 local jobs. How is that efficient management for this community? Mr. Mayor, other things that we could look at is making sure that when Cabinet are asked by decisions, they don't abdicate that. We get efficient operation. So that, as I referred to in a previous meeting, the huge increases for our residents in permit parking are dealt with in public, so the residents know why these charges are being levied and why they must be made. Because there's nothing in the report that the public saw about how much it was going to raise, £500,000 a year, that was abdicated by the Cabinet and a decision not made in public. And that's just one of many things where we've seen this abdication. As we saw at a call-in, Mr. Mayor, over 30 options were looked at for a preferred scheme at Cooper Bridge. When questioned by the Scrutiny Committee, chaired by a Labour member, we were told that Cabinet members had not been involved in the selection of the final option. It was done purely by officers. So, abdication. Mr. Mayor, I'm pleased to see that the leader is looking at efficiencies. And one of the things that I've reflected on is the number of Cabinet members that we used to have, Mr. Mayor. There used to be 8 Cabinet members. We're now on 9. With the abdication of responsibility, Mr. Mayor, maybe we could look at more efficiencies for a Cabinet and do away with a lot of them and save a lot more money.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the comments I'm going to make, I'm by no means defending or endorsing all the decisions that this local Labour council has taken. As with all councils, not all decisions are good, and there are some questionable choices have been made. There's no doubt about that. I also commend the Conservative colleagues who have been brave enough to come up and try and defend their position nationally, which is, as far as I can tell, indefensible. I'm going to repeat a few of the things that other people have alluded to. What we're faced with is the culmination of a decade of defunding and hollowing out of our public services generally, and in particular, local councils, and in more particular, northern metropolitan local councils. Councils like ours, by and large, have been left with a simple choice. Either go bust or cut services and increase local council tax. It's been a stealth tax on local council taxpayers, at the same time with the government shifting responsibility from central government, where they should be funded as properly, and putting the blame on councils. I repeat what I said at the last council meeting. We have the highest tax burden in over 60 years. Our national debt is over £1 trillion, 85% of GDP. Historic highs. Where has our money gone? Where have our taxes gone? Councillor Taylor said that we are currently spending more of our GDP on public services than ever. That's patently not true. It's a little above where we were, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. And there was a big spike during the COVID period for obvious reasons. The simple fact of the matter is that we are facing the reality of a decade of an ideology which is hell-bent on privatising everything. That said, we face the situation that we face. We have reality and we have hard choices to make. And we really need to operate in a spirit of cooperation to do what's best for our residents. What clearly needs to be done is to define what's essential, what's statutory, and what's prudent in the services that we deliver to our residents. And bear in mind at all times, it is people that deliver services. So the last place that the axe should ever fall is on people. Thank you.
Point of order. Councillor Simpson, you're running into our time. I hope it's a good one.
Moving that, if necessary, we extend times to items 12 and 14, maybe.
Well, I may decide that we've had enough discussion on item 16 and we move on to the next one. So you could extend the time, but we'll move on from this item. How's that? We'll take the next speaker, Councillor O'Donovan.
Oh, where to start, Mr. Mayor?
I wouldn't take too long because I won't have any more repetition.
Well, shut the front door, hold on to your hats, because council won't solve the ills, the financial problems of this council. It's all Spenborough Pool's cafe's fault, isn't it? We could have solved this all with a cafe at Spenborough Pool, and we should hold public meetings where people can decide on parking permits. Out of touch with reality, not in the real world. The Councillor Taylor asked that this debate be focused on solutions and what's manageable and what's realistic, and I'm afraid we all know that no cafe at Spenborough Pool, rights or wrongs of the history of that story, has got anything to do with the financial situation of this council. It was interesting to hear Councillor Ramsey mention Rishi Sunak in Tunbridge Wells, because the other thing that Rishi Sunak said in Tunbridge Wells when he was aiming to be the Prime Minister, if it wasn't bad that we had 10 years of austerity, where George Osborne started to turn the screw hugely on public sector spending, massively. But what did Rishi Sunak do and admit to in that garden party in Tunbridge Wells? He said, I inherited a broken system, a broken formula funding local government that favoured funding towards deprived urban areas. He said, I reversed that. So if it wasn't bad enough that we did 10 years of austerity, Rishi Sunak comes along in 2020 as the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he turns the screw even further on all public sector, all local authorities, and says, do you know what? 10 years of austerity is not good enough. We'll turn that screw even further, and I'll change the funding formula. Thank you. We'll change the funding formula so that urban deprived areas get less, and the rural, leafy, Tunbridge Wells type areas get even more. I will be quick, Mr. Mayor. What's really interesting to look when you do look on the internet as well, on the government websites, is that since 2010, the amount of tax, broadly speaking, tax income that the government have received, anything from corporation tax to income tax, value-added tax, fuel duty, you name it, everything under that tax bracket is over 400 billion rise in tax income in the last 10, 13 years. 400 billion. Yet in that same period, with that windfall of 400 billion, they've cut more than 20 billion out of the public sector, local authorities. They've taken similar amounts from police, from fire, from prisons, from the Environment Agency, from DEFRA, from every department you can imagine. They wrote off 14.3 billion of COVID loans. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. I'm glad that somebody mentioned the Building Schools for the Future as well, because that was a 55 billion costed plan as well in 2010. That was one of the first things the Conservatives and the Lib Dems pulled away. They pulled the rug out of every single department through local government and public sector to the point where there was nothing left. We all know where this problem lies, and it lies with the Conservative government. Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Can I just take the time to thank everybody for making their contributions tonight about the Council's financial challenges. I'll leave you with this thought tonight, because I know time's precious and we've got some other items. We have a list of the top 10 councils which are in huge deficit, and the majority of them are Conservative councils. And so they're in it, same as us. So we really need to be lobbying this government. But thank you everybody for your input.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. If we may, we'll move to item 12, Council Budget Strategy Update 24-25 and future years, reference from Cabinet. Councillor Turner, we have, if you wish to finish at 9, you've got 5 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Feels like deja vu. There's many times that finances have been kicked to the end of the meeting and I've had to sort of rush through it. But I have some important points I wish to make, and I'm make no apologies for reiterating some of the things that's been said in the previous discussion. And I'm not entirely sure whether John Taylor has given me praise or not at the expense of my erstwhile colleague, Councillor Davis, who I think has overseen the budget in very difficult times. So I have every confidence, and I'm sure that I can pick up the mantle and continue the good work he started. So we know we face unprecedented pressures on the budget for 2023 and 2024, but even more so from 24-25. Since 2010, we have seen a constant reduction in spending on local authorities by central government. A reduction in 13 years of about £1 billion in Kirklees alone. We've cut back, reduced services, stopped doing some things, transformed many departments, but despite our best efforts, the challenges remain. We have seen up and down the country councils issuing the dreaded Section 114 notice. And I do get and understand that some of those councils have made very bad decisions by being inefficient, and some buried their heads in the sand and refused to act until the crunch came. However, this is not the case with most councils, and certainly not with our council here in Kirklees, or the other 190 councils that have budget deficits. We've had a clean bill of health every year from external auditors, so we know we've been running a very tight ship and living within our means. No dodgy investment in tower blocks, solar farms, out of area shopping areas in this council. In the last 13 years, no matter how tough it's been, we have, by cutting our cloth accordingly, delivered a balanced budget. We only did that by taking tough decisions. Decisions that I and my group hated having to make, but make them we did. But we must live within our means, and it's not only our legal requirement, but the right thing to do for our residents. We can't spend money we haven't got in the hope that at some point in the future, the government will come to its senses and realise that the very fabric of our society is crumbling around us, quite literally. They need to provide a local authority with the funding it needs to deliver vital services. So we need to find £47 million worth of savings for the 24-25 budget. And once again, we will have to make very difficult decisions on what services we cut, what services we reduce, and what buildings we must close. No one on this side of the room wants to do this. We believe in public services, we believe in fair funding of local government, and far too often we see richer areas getting a bit bigger slice of the pie than we do. We spent £796 per head of population. North Yorkshire has £887 per head. Cheshire West, £867 per head. And Surrey, that really deprived area down south, a whopping £915. A whole £119 per head than us. Does anybody really think here this evening that the leasing suburbs of Surrey are more deprived than the areas of Kirklees? If we had the same funding as Surrey, we would have an extra £51.25 million to spend this year. So instead of cutting services, we could be investing in services, repairing some of the damage that 13 years of this failed government has done to public services. As been mentioned, we are the 118th worst funded local authority in the country. Does anybody here really believe the 117 councils need the money more than we do? I know they're going to say, the opposition, it's all our Labour cabinets and Labour group's fault, and we see the same with central government. They will do anything to deflect from the truth and fail to take responsibility for their actions. But facts don't lie. We are chronically underfunded here in Kirklees. Demand for services continues to rise, yet our funding fails to keep up with that demand, heaping yet more pressure on our budget. We have seen the steady decline in every sector of public services over the last 13 years of a Tory government. And let's not forget 5 years of that where they were propped up by the Lib Dems. It's not an accident or coincidence that 191 councils are facing budget deficits. It's not an accident or coincidence that our schools are falling apart, quite literally as we sit here. It's not an accident or coincidence that prison services throw...
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Most welcome.
You'll never guess what I'm going to say, Mr. Mayor. I move that we extend time so that item 14 may also be considered, and I also move that once the motion is moved and seconded, we move straight to the vote on each item. Thank you.
Seconded. Councillor Cooper. Yeah.
Can we also add the motion from our group and from the Liberal Democrats to that list, because those actually require the council to do something about the financial crisis that we have got, and not just simply talk about it.
Is that seconded? Ooh. Councillor Hussain, thank you. We have two proposals, one to extend standing orders, then move to the vote on both. We had proposed by Councillor Simpson, seconded by Councillor Hussain. Those... Remind the time.
But they
the proposal happened before 9, so we will continue. I started, so I'll finish. All those in favour? Those against? We will carry on. The second... Thank you. Jackie, still give me advice. She's gone. The second proposal from Councillor Cooper was seconded by Councillor Hussain. And Councillor Lawson, amongst others. All those in favour? Those against? No, that's not happening. Councillor Turner. Apologies for the interruption, you may continue.
All right, Mr. Mayor, it's, you know, they usually try and shut me up. Where was it? It's not an accident or coincidence that the prison service is so stretched that suspected terrorists can literally walk out of the prison, potentially putting lives at risk. It's also not an accident or coincidence that NHS waiting lists are at an all-time record. And it's no accident or coincidence that rape convictions are at the lowest level since tracking began in 2009.
See, you've got me confused now, Simpson. I could go on about the failure of the government to support public service, as the list is virtually endless. But we haven't got the time, I haven't got the inclination. You've heard it all before.
Thank you very much, Councillor Turner. Thank you. Is that seconded? Councillor Scott, thank you. Did you say move to the vote? Thank you. You move to the vote? Thank you. All those in favour, show of hands. Those against? Abstentions? That's carried. Okay, item 14, appointment of committee and panel chairs. Council is asked to appoint a chair of appeals panel, environment and climate change scrutiny panel, growth and regeneration scrutiny panel, health and wellbeing board, personnel committee, planning subcommittee having Woollen area, and standards committee. Councillor Sokal, you got 10 minutes. Don't go there.
I don't need 10 minutes anyway. 10 seconds. Mr. Mayor, I move that the nomination as set out in paragraph 2 of the report, page 282, be approved subject to the amendment of number 1, the chair of the Environment and Climate Change Scrutiny Panel to be Councillor Joe Lawson. Second, the chair of Standards Committee to be Councillor Harry McCarthy. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Sokal. Is that seconded? Councillor Davis, thank you very much. Move to the vote. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. All those in favour?
Who seconded?
Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry.
That's me. Oh, the mic was on. Those against? Any abstentions? Against? Abstentions? Thank you. That is carried. That's where we'll end the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance, your contributions. Until next time, thank you very much. And thank you, Jackie.